Welcome to the Teamwork Advantage podcast with Greg Gregory. Join us as Greg interviews powerful thought leaders and successful team and leadership experts from across the country on teamwork, leadership, and organizational culture. Now let's check in for this week's episode.
Welcome to the Teamwork Advantage, a podcast dedicated to the growth and development of teamwork, leadership, and culture. Hi, my name is Greg Gregory, certified speaking professional, founder, creator of the Teamwork Advantage. We're excited to bring to you weekly guests that bring ideas and strategies that you can use in your personal life and your professional life that can help you grow as a team member yourself, help you lead teams, build teams, and these teams can be even your church choir, your college team, your HOAs. All of these organizations struggle with a lot of the same issues. So we're joined today by a gentleman that, while I've heard of his name before, we had never met. I have met his father. Let's talk about that a little bit today as we go along. David Covey is the author of the best-selling book, Trap Tales, Outsmarting the 7 Hidden Obstacles to Success. He's also the third son of Stephen R. Covey, the author of the groundbreaking book and one of my Bibles, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. David earned his MBA from Harvard University and spent some time working with Procter & Gamble and American Express. Now he is serves as the co-founder and CEO of SM Covey, a global licensing company that's scaling with work and intellectual property content experts and helps distribute their content globally. And we're going to talk a lot about a lot of different things today, so strap it in. Let's get ready to have some fun. David, welcome to the Teamwork Advantage.
Appreciate being on. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, we're excited about all this because as we start to get into everything and learn about your business and everything else, tell us how you got to where you are. Now, we know that your father is the famous one in all aspects from everything that he did, but how did David get to where David is today?
Yeah, so I grew up and my father was a professor growing up, and he was a professor for 25 years. And then when I was 17, he decided to break out at age 50 and leave being a professor and setting up his own business. And I became fascinated with that, that he would do that kind of as a second career, because he had a really good career with, being a professor and being in academia and doing some consulting and so forth. But he decided to risk it all. He just really wanted to reach more people. And he went out and built this business called Covey Leadership Center, which then later became Franklin Covey. So I was really fascinated by content, and I'm kind of a content junkie. That's why I like taking content, not just Franklin Covey content or content from my family, but content, the best in class content, and taking that content and helping these IP owners, these intellectual property owners, go global with their content. Because most people have, a lot of people have really good content, but they have no idea how to distribute it, how to monetize it, and how to have it grow successfully. And so so I got involved at the company after, so I worked for Procter & Gamble out of college, and then I went to business school, and then I decided, to come back to what was then a small training company called Covey Leadership Center. And I ended up selling, the 7 Habits and other Franklin Covey content. And then I had this opportunity to work internationally. And I'm very adventurous. My wife is very adventurous. My wife was 6 months pregnant. And I said, "Hey, how would you like to go live in Australia?" And she was like, "I'm there." And so
I thought you were going to tell me you went skydiving at 6 months. Okay.
Yeah, totally. So anyway, we moved to Australia, and I kind of caught the international bug. I loved my time in Australia, and then I spent some time in Japan and time in London. And before you knew it, I was kind of the international guy, and I was managing all the licensees for Franklin Covey. And then the idea came is, hey, if I'm doing this for one brand, why not do this for a lot of brands? Because I kept having people approach me saying, "Can you help my program go, global, just like you've done with 7 Habits?" And I said, "I can't. I work for Franklin Covey. And so that's kind of what created this SM Cov business. SM is the name of my business partner, Stefan Mardiks. He lives in Dallas, Texas.
And he was on the Covey or the Franklin side, am I right?
No, he actually, what happened is I recruited Stefan to the Franklin Covey company, and when we were going to go in Europe with licensing. And he's from Europe. He's from France originally, and he's had a lot of experience in Europe. And I said, hey, help me grow our network in Europe.
Okay.
And so he ended up doing that, and then we ended up being business partners now.
That's awesome. And I don't want to miss this, because your dad started the Covey leadership aspect when he was 50. And tell everybody how many kids he had at the time.
9 kids. Yeah.
9.
So when I started my business, I was 44 and I had 7 kids. I only wanted to have 5. My dad said, if you want to stay at the company, you got to have 7. You can't work for a 7 habits company.
Is there something about,
kids.
I mean, your book is the 7 hidden obstacles, the 7 habits of highly effective people. What is the secret behind 7? Is there something there?
I don't know. I mean, look into the Bible, right? They have the 7 days of creation. I mean, I think it's a magical number. There's something about it, but you can't really be a Covey and have the 5 traps, or the 5 habits. You gotta have the 7.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about some of this right now. One of the things that I was noticing and I've heard about is something you refer to as a Renaissance leader.
Yes.
What? I mean, the word Renaissance and leader, and I kind of get it, but how do you define it?
Yeah. So a Renaissance leader is, I would, that's really a 21st century leader. It's leaders that we have now, and if you look at some examples, I think that Steve Jobs represented some of the characteristics of what a Renaissance leader is. He really represented this idea around focus. He was maniacally focused, and he saved Apple, right? His own company. When he came back, it was totally an unfocused company. He forced it to be refocused. The famous story that you can read in Walter Isaacson's biography on Steve Jobs is his first 2 months, he was the interim CEO, not the CEO yet, but he went around and he drew a 2x2 matrix and said, we're going to create 4 products, 2 products for the consumer and 2 products for the professional. And the rest of it goes away. And everybody flipped out, but he focused, he allowed Apple to be focused. And so I really admire him for that. Wasn't necessarily a nice boss or maybe even necessarily a good person. And a lot of times you think, oh, these people have to have all these perfect characteristics. No one does. We're all flawed in some way.
Oh, absolutely.
And so I think Steve Jobs is one example of that. I think Indra Nooyi, I just had an opportunity to meet Indra Nooyi. She was the former CEO of PepsiCo. And she talks about, what some of her work that she did. And one of the things that she did that I thought was remarkable is that she wrote letters to all of her top senior people, to the parents of those top leaders, and wrote about what unique contribution their son or daughter was having in the company, and how proud Indra was to have them on the team and so forth. And it was like, she was saying, I just did it out of kind of instinct, and, it just felt like the right thing to do. But she said it was like one of the single greatest leadership things I've ever done, because not only could these leaders never criticize me, because they would go back home and they would say, hey, how's Indra? She's so nice, and then they had the letter, and then the parents finally, as it is a parent, you never get a lot of paydays, but the parents, to have that payday of having somebody acknowledge their son or daughter, for these attributes, they were all huge fans of Indra. But it was just a really, really genuine thing. I think that she's an example of a Renaissance leader.
And that's really interesting that we talk about it, because has the Renaissance leader changed in your eyes with this pandemic?
It's a really good question. I was going to say some of the Renaissance leaders in the past, Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, Galileo. I was looking at Leonardo. He had 7 principles that he lived by. And this is in the 1500s. Tell me if this doesn't sound applicable today. Let me read these. Curiosity. Okay. I think that's important. Independent thinking. Yeah. Refine your senses. Yep. Embrace uncertainty. Yeah. Whole brain thinking, art and science, mind and body care, and interconnectedness. I mean, that was written in the 1500s, more than 500 years ago. All of those principles, I think, are very, very applicable today. I have my own list. If you want to hear my list of 7, the 7 traits of a Renaissance leader. So focus is one. I mentioned Steve Jobs is a good example of that. Reinvent. I think that Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos are good examples of that. Experiment. It's so important that you experiment and you try new things. And
yes.
Jeff
And don't
Bezos
expect to succeed on them all either.
Yeah, of course you're not. You got to learn to have a growth mindset. You know, you look at the failures as a way to grow and learn instead of a fixed mindset. You know, Carol Dweck, is famous for that fixed mindset or growth mindset. Zen, you got to be in this place of Zen, where you have your Zen place. And I talk about the trigger trap. You and I were talking about that briefly. And
we're going to get to the traps in a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah. You got to give it your Zen place. And then collaborate. It's so important. It's not just about you. It's about collaboration. Wholeness. We are whole people. And a lot of times, people think that we're fragmented people, but we're not. And then we got to elevate. We got to elevate our game. We got to elevate ourselves, to the next level. So anyway, those are my 7 characteristics. Probably not as good as Leonardo's, but I think those characteristics represent what we need in leaders today.
Yeah. And a lot of them, between the 2 of those, I can tie them all back to, I don't know, what have we got? We got to be proactive and, begin with the end in mind. And a lot of that still comes back from the 7 habits too.
No question about it. I think 7 habits is really all foundational stuff. It's classical stuff. It just doesn't go away with time. And it's about building your character and your competence and the person who you are. So yeah, I think it's all foundational.
I was doing in the mortgage business before I got into speaking and working with teams. And I was doing a loan application with a gentleman one day, a senior manager with a big Fortune 500 company.
Yeah.
And we got talking and something was said, and I talked about the 7 habits of highly effective people. And I said, have you read that? He says, read it. Next to the Bible, that's required reading in our company. So,
well, for me growing up, I had to be proactive at age 3 and think win-win at age 4, listen empathically at age 5. So for me, it was a philosophy. So absolutely.
I want to know how you sharpened the saw at 7.
How at age 7, you mean, or what?
Yeah. Well, you said habit 7, sharpen the saw. So I figured you were 7 years old when you had to sharpen.
Oh, right. Well, actually, the 7-year-old story is with my brother, Stephen M.R. He's the green and clean. You remember the green and clean story? Yes,
the green and clean story. Yes.
So, but he wants it to be known that he was only 7 years old, when he was given stewardship for the whole lawn.
But he had to mow the yard, clean and green.
Yeah.
For anybody who's listening is going, what are they talking about? Yeah, gotta go get the stories on that one.
Yeah. It's one of the classic stories, but it was just basically the story of my brother that, my father was teaching stewardship delegation. And when you give someone a stewardship, you don't supervise their methods. You hold them accountable for the results and let them, choose the different methods that they want to choose. And it was a good lesson for my brother, Stephen, and hopefully for a lot of other people that have read the story.
Oh, absolutely. And that's a huge part of what I talk about today about vulnerability and leadership too. Allow yourself to be vulnerable, step away, let the people go, and be able to do some things that way. So there's a give and take push goes with that.
No question. And it is really hard because, all of us have egos and all of us have kind of our way of doing things. And sometimes we think it's the superior way to do things. And, and when someone does something different, you're thinking, it's very hard to kind of step back and, just let them go. And everybody has their own approach and their own methods, and you have to just respect that,
And that comes up a lot when we're in volunteer organizations and committees.
No question about it. Yeah. So, honestly, the biggest thing is to try to say, hey, look, what is the desired results? What are the outcomes we're all seeking together? And then let people come up with the methods. Because, one of my favorite quotes my father is, if you supervise people's methods, you become responsible for the results. So you can never supervise people's methods.
Wow, that's a great quote. I don't think I've ever heard that one.
Yeah. But think about it. If you're overseeing and micromanaging someone and the way they're doing it, they're like, okay. So they basically just give up their, sense of control. Yep. Okay, I'll do what you said. And then of course they kind of want to just go out and do what you said and make sure that it fails. So they can say, hey, I did what you said, boss. And it didn't work.
Or when it doesn't work, they're going to take you down with them.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly. So let's talk a little bit about the traps. Okay. You've got the book that's called Trap Tales.
Yeah.
Outsmarting. That's the key word here, not conquering. It's outsmarting the 7 hidden obstacles to success. So these can be applicable to individuals, to the organization, all the way across the board. Am I right?
Yeah, absolutely. And people ask, there are more than 7. It's like, yeah, of course there's more than 7, but I tried to whittle it down to the 7 most common workplace traps that we face. Not only just in the United States, but globally.
Yeah. Now you also use the term called a trapologist.
Yeah.
So let's define what a trapologist is.
Yeah. So a trapologist is somebody, as a leader, as a person who can spot and avoid staying out of the traps. So one of the best ways that we can learn about the future is not to repeat it, right? We can learn vicariously. And some of us are very stubborn. We have to learn it for it. A lot of times I include myself in that category. Sometimes you have to learn the hard lesson yourself, but it would be better if we can learn vicariously through other people's experiences, to avoid, say, these traps or avoid, making mistakes and so forth. So I think what I wanted to bring to light with this book and my co-author, Stefan Martix, is to show that there are these traps that we can fall into. And a lot of times people don't even think of them. They're not even aware of, really? Okay, that's a trap. And in fact, even labeling it a trap makes people feel better because they can feel like, okay, well, I'm not just a total idiot. There actually was some maybe forces that were kind of, pushing me towards, some of these traps. And I think there are.
And as we said before we got started, I've gone through the 7 traps, and at one time or another, I've been in every single one of those traps.
Yeah.
And sometimes multiple ones at a time. And so let's kind of let's dive into the 7 traps. It's fascinating to listen to this. And hopefully you'll be able to give us quick tip to get out of that trap, or either get out of once we fall in, or to avoid it altogether.
Okay, I will. And I'll do that for everyone. So the first trap is the busyness trap. And this is where we are drowning in the thick of thin things. So think about what we have around us. A lot of the stuff that we have around us is minutia. It's not important. It's not, it's not essential. And we're trapped in it. A lot of social media. And again, I'm not against social media, but social media, excessive internet surfing, we can fall into this trap of being busy, doing a lot of things, but not really being involved in significant work.
That ties into something called habit number 3, right?
Yeah. Put first things first, prioritize. Oh, and the word I would use for it is focus. It's the same idea, but you have to be able to be focused, and you have to learn to say no. That's the biggest challenge, is that most people they have a hard time saying no. And so what ends up happening is they end up taking on too much, and then they end up becoming overwhelmed. And then when you have too many things to do and too many things on your plate, it's like trying to juggle, 10 balls. All the balls are going to fall. You just can't juggle 10 balls. As human beings, we're only designed to do one thing well. I talk about this multitasking, how we're not designed to multitask.
Computers don't multitask.
And yet we try to do it.
Yeah.
We try to do it. So we have to avoid multitasking. We have to stay focused, do one thing at a time, focus our priorities on the most important things. This is like the habit 3, put first things first. My father used the analogy there where he would have a jar, and he had big rocks, and he'd have pebbles, and he'd have sand and water. And the only way to get all those elements in is to put the big rocks in first. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's what we need to do is we need to prioritize and put the big rocks first. But to do that, we have to learn how to say no. And
that's hard.
And accept. It's very, very hard. I've become good at it, I think, because I've had a lot of training and I've had a lot of failures, along the way, but I've learned now to how to say no and try to prioritize. But
yeah,
and that's easy, but does hard.
That's a big one for me. There's no doubt, because all the busyness, and that goes back into the 4 quadrants, doing a lot of things that are sometimes urgent but not important.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
And quadrant 2, which are things that are important but not urgent, you have to act upon them. So that's why I say,
and that's the focus.
In my program, focus on your highest priorities in the morning, first thing in the morning. Why? Because that's when you're freshest, that's when you're sharpest, and you should focus on your big projects there. What do? We do the opposite of that. We get up, we start reading our email, we start looking at social media, and we get immediately caught up into the minutia. Other people's, emails is pretty much, most of it is other people's agendas. And that's fine. We're human beings. We need to interact with other people and help each other. But, you have your projects too, and you're never going to be able to do those very effectively if you're always, too busy with other people's agendas.
So
and,
what
and
do you
also
tell people?
Too much email.
What do you tell people who say, but I'm not a morning person?
Okay, that's fine. You had Winston Churchill, right? He would work late and sleep in, and then he'd have his afternoon nap as well. I think it's fine. I think I say morning because I think most people can relate to the idea that you're freshest when you wake up.
Absolutely.
But if your freshest time is at 9 p.m., that's when you get your second life. Great, do it then.
So do your highest payoff activities during your peak time.
That's the point. Yeah, perfectly said.
Yeah. So let's talk about number 2. Trap number 2.
Yes, trap number 2 is the procrastination trap. This is idling in the status quo, and all of us have things that we know we need to change. In fact, I've asked this to audiences all over the world. I say, how many of you know that there's something in your work life that you need to change? You don't need to tell me what it is, but just raise your hand if that's the case. Everybody raises their hand. And I say, so why haven't you done it? And the reason why they don't do it is that change is hard. And it's much easier to kind of stay where we're at, stay in our status quo. But so it's not a matter of not knowing, it's just a matter of not doing. So this idea is the procrastination trap is to say, look, we are procrastinating, we're postponing, the things that we need to change. And by the way, not only do humans do this, companies do this, countries can do this. This is a big problem for all of us, because I say companies, I love to study like the Fortune 500 companies. And of course, the Fortune 500 is the highest revenue, down to a certain level. I think you have to almost be like $5 billion now in revenue, even to make number 500 on the list. But they show that in the last, what was the study? In the last 25 years, 75% of those companies are off the list that were on there 25 years ago. Why? Wow. The reason why is that they rest on their laurels and they procrastinate the changes. So that the antidote to the procrastination trap is to reinvent. And it's the idea of changing before you have to change. And because you're either going to be humbled by the force of circumstance, or you're going to be humbled by the force of conscience.
Okay.
And the idea is to change before you have to change. So what in your mind and your head is telling you what you need to do,
you probably need to do it.
You need to do that. And if you don't do it and you keep neglecting it, guess what's going to happen? Circumstances are going to come up and it's going to, and we're going to be forced to change.
Yeah. And
when we're forced to change, then we don't have really good options. Then we're applying it. We're trying to, get back to where we were, and it's hard.
One of the companies that comes to mind as you're talking about that is Harley Davidson. They had to know how to make that change because they had such a reputation in one way. And in the early 80s, they actually made that dramatic change. And they're still one of the largest selling companies, motorcycles today.
Absolutely. And there's a lot of great examples. I love I love the example of Rocket Mortgage, how they have changed they reinvented the whole mortgage industry.
Why? Oh, absolutely. And spending 15 years in the mortgage business, I've watched how that's changed. That's amazing.
And the commercials are so funny. They just make fun of all the acronyms that people use in the mortgage business, and they say, you know what, we make we take the complication out, we make it easy. And they've reinvented that whole process. So we need to do that for our own lives, and our companies need to do that. And if we don't, then we're gonna be in for a rude awakening.
Yeah. So number 3, and correct me if I'm wrong, if I've seen a couple of things that you've talked about. The first 3 are kind of more intra views. Am I right?
Correct. Yeah, they're more related to yourself as an individual.
They can go to the team and the organization. So number 3 is about ego.
Yeah.
What do you mean?
This is the ego trap, where we try to maintain this facade of perfection. So think about social media. If you're ever on social media, you ever see anybody on Instagram? Tell me what you see. You see beautiful people wearing beautiful clothes or lack of clothes. They're always on vacation. They have this, so we create this perception or this facade that everything is perfect. And a lot of times we play it, we're risk averse. We play it too safe, and we don't take enough risks, and we don't experiment. We don't try new things. And so this trap is really about not being so risk averse and taking chances and experimenting and trying different things. And that's kind of how we learn, and that's how we grow, and not to be embarrassed by that. And I think a lot of times, in our country, and I think this is also in Asia, I spent a lot of time in Asia, just playing more of a risk adverse and not trying new and different things in our work interactions and in trying to get different results. So that
goes back to the entire automobile industry back in the 70s.
Yeah.
How Japan changed everything about how they did it and all that.
It's true. Yeah.
Yeah.
And we became flat-footed, and the big 3, became less relevant, and we were behind the curveball. Yeah. So it's very true. I love Jeff Bezos, what he talks about with Amazon. He's since left Amazon. He's not the CEO anymore, but he was big on experimentation. And he says, and if you know in advance that it's an experiment, it's not an experiment, that it's going to work. It's not an experiment, so I loved how Google used to have, where they said that, you can spend 20% of your time on pet projects.
Yeah. Yeah.
And what was created from there was Google Earth, Gmail, and many other great creations that would not have happened. So I think,
and I'm sure there were some things that never got created because it's like, what's that?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And that's okay.
Exactly. Yeah. But I think that, we're not like that. Most of us are trying to maintain this facade of, everything's great and perfect. And the result of that is that we end up playing it too safe, and we don't take enough risks in our jobs. And as employers and as leaders, we should be very open to people taking risks. And instead of punishing those people, we should actually praise those people and say, look, these are people that are trying new and different things, and we want that. We encourage that, because that's how we get innovation. Right. That's how we get new creations.
Yeah. Some people want to stifle it because they're afraid that somebody's going to take their job. And that's just, in my mind, has no place. And that's one of the things I think Herb Kelleher was great at with Southwest as well. So
he was great in allowing people to be themselves, to have a personality.
Yes.
Without punishing. I also love Herb in the sense that I love how he was just so bold in saying, you know what? Employees are number 1.
Yep.
Customers are number 2. It's like, what? I mean, he was the only person that was bold enough to say, our employees are number one. But then he came back and said, look, if we take care of our employees, they'll take care of our customers. And if they take care of our customers, the finances will follow. Shareholders will follow. Mm-hmm. But absolutely, I think we play it too safe and we try to maintain this facade. And I think that we shouldn't do that.
I'll never forget walking through Tampa Airport years ago. 3 flight attendants, a flight crew working together, 2 male, 1 female. And the 2 guys were going, they were singing songs, beach songs, and they had picked up the girl carrying her like a surfboard. And they were all singing it walking through the airport. It just made everybody laugh.
Oh, yeah. Well, I was on a bus the other day in Disney World in Orlando, and the car rental. And the driver on the bus was this woman that was just singing songs.
Yeah.
And she would just sing these songs, just bellow them out while she was driving. And she'd say, come on, everybody sing with me. It's just like, I loved it. I just loved it. I mean, it was just so unforgettable. I'll never forget her and her enthusiasm. Yeah. It made me smile, made me laugh. I sang with her, and I think we just need more of that.
It was not long after 9/11, I was back on an airplane, and the lines of security at that point were just massive. And I had my suitcase and I was sitting on my suitcase. I'd move it up a few minutes, sit there again. At one point, I was literally kind of falling asleep while sitting on my suitcase. And all of a sudden, somebody came up from behind me and slapped me in the back of the head. And I jumped up. I didn't know what was happening. I was like, going to fight. And I couldn't help but laugh. It was 2 people from Southwest Airlines dressed up like Lucy and Ethel. And everybody, they were laughing at me because they knew that I had fallen asleep and just everything. I loved it. It was the funniest
that's
thing
awesome.
So that's about getting out of there and allowing creativity to really open up.
Yeah. Innovation only comes through trial and error.
Yeah.
And Ed Catmull, it was the former CEO of Pixar. He talks about how early on the Pixar movies that they have, he says they suck. I'm using his words. And he says, our job is to make him go from suck to non-suck. And he says, the only way to do that is through iterations and experimenting and trying new and different things. So we like to ascribe that there's these natural people that are geniuses. Of course, Malcolm Gladwell wrote that, the 10,000 hour rule. And, the whole idea that, there are people that have natural inclinations to certain things, but most of the time it's hard work. Yeah. And it's their willingness to experiment. The Beatles didn't show up at the Ed Sullivan Show in February 1964, and voila, they were just suddenly a sensation. They were a sensation because they played in Hamburg for 16 months, 2 or 3 gigs a night. They played more in Hamburg in that 16 months than most bands will play in their whole life. And that's really what's involved with us is we need to go through the iterations, we need to put in the hours, and we need to have the willingness to experiment.
Yeah.
So the word for that, to overcome that trap, the ego trap, is to experiment.
Experiment.
Try, fail, learn, and repeat.
So let's go back over the first 3. Busyness, the way to get out of the busyness thing is to focus.
Focus. And say no.
Procrastination
say no too is the second part.
Say no too. Focus and say no. Okay.
Yep.
Procrastination, how do we get out of that trap?
Reinvent.
Okay.
Change before you have to change, right?
Okay.
Yep.
And then ego?
Experiment. Try,
don't
fail,
be afraid to fail.
learn.
I mean, that's the biggest thing. I mean, Babe Ruth struck out more times than he hit home runs.
Yeah.
And even the greatest of all in baseball, you fail 70% of the time, you're still in the Hall of Fame.
Right. And there's the Michael Jordan quote. I won't give the exact numbers, right? But, he talks about how many times he was given the chance to win, to take the winning shot and missed.
Yeah.
And it was, I don't know, something like 40 times or whatever. It was a big number.
Yeah.
And yeah,
he also understood how to give to
exactly.
the point, and that's how they won a championship one time. Everybody knew he was going to go to Jordan, and he passed.
I know. And unfortunately, it happened against my beloved Utah Jazz in 1998, where he did kind of push off on B. Russ, and then he went up for the shot and crushed every heart of every Utahn.
Yeah. Well, you'll be happy to know we did have a guest on our show from the Utah Jazz, Mark Eaton.
Okay. Oh
Yeah.
yeah. Just before he passed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Literally, it was a few months before he passed away. I was so
Oh,
bummed when I
wow.
heard that.
What a phenomenal human being he was.
Oh,
So,
absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah. All right. So let's get into the business side of things. Trap number 4 is what?
It's the trigger trap. So now we're talking, the next 3 traps are really our interactions with other people. Okay. So the trigger trap, we all have certain triggers, things that set us off. Okay. In fact, we do a little assessment where people go through it and they can look at their triggers. And this is where we allow emotion to taint our perspective. And what happens is our brain literally shuts off, our prefrontal cortex,
Okay.
the decision part of our brain. When we're triggered, that shuts off and we react. Now that made sense for our ancestors, because when the dinosaurs coming at you, your job was just to get out and react this, this fight or flight. But a lot of us have these triggers at work, things that set us off, and we don't have a plan on how to manage it. And that's a big problem. And that can get us into a lot of trouble. And so we have to know what our triggers are in advance and manage it. I call it getting into our Zen place. This is the, okay. Happy Gilmore, get into your happy place. Remember, come on, Happy. Carl Weathers was telling Happy Gilmore to get into his happy place. We need to get in our happy place, our Zen place, where we manage our triggers. I know my triggers, and I have a specific plan that when I am triggered, I have a specific plan that I use.
And depending on the trigger, I'm the same way.
Yeah.
So we just got to figure out, we know what triggers us. What's something that triggers you?
I'll give you just kind of an everyday life, work life. Everyday life one. So one is slow drivers. I can't stand slow drivers. I literally, and my wife keeps telling me, it doesn't matter, and it doesn't. So I do 2 things. I stop and I breathe. Okay. Doesn't matter. And then I make up a story as to why they're driving so slow. Oh, their husband must have just died, or they failed the bar exam for the 3rd time in a row. I make up a story about how this asinine, stupid person can be driving so slow. And then it helps me. It helps
reframe
me deal with that trigger.
And your father did the same thing in the 7 Habits about the children on the subway going crazy.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. That was an example of misjudging the situation where he was just, he was kind of judgmental and kind of irritated. But then when he found out more information, it was like, oh, sympathy, empathy, how can I help you?
It goes back to the emotional bank accounts and everything else.
So the one for me at work is when people take credit for my work. That's a big trigger.
Ooh.
And I think work, people at work can relate this, you basically share an idea or something, and then your boss or maybe a peer is now in a meeting, and then they're talking about the idea as if it's their idea. And they're not giving any attribution, to the fact. And it's not hard to do. All they have to do is just say, hey, I was, talking with David and he mentioned this idea and I further thought about it and kind of came up with, it's simple to give attribution, but a lot of times people don't do that. That's a trigger for me. So what I do is I very politely take the person aside after and say, I just want you to know that I am bothered that, that you're not acknowledging that I had some part in the idea that you're suggesting, and you're just suggesting it as your idea only. And I don't think that's accurate. So I would appreciate if you would give some attribution to.
And that's much easier said than done.
It is much easier said than done, especially when it's your boss. But I find that if you do it in a respectful way, that most of the time that they will agree to do that. If they don't do it, and I've had that as well, I will insert myself. Oh yeah. This was the idea I talked with you about. You remember?
In front of others.
Yeah. And so it's like, you know what? No, I'm not going to just sit there and be stampede on this when I've contributed that and I've given you the feedback and you're not willing to do that. So I'm going to bring it up.
Yeah.
Fair game. And so what's the alternative to that? Not to say anything, just get offended, just get mad. And then you have all that anger seething and it builds it up, builds up and builds up. And then one day, you do something really stupid because you have all this pent up, anger.
Yeah. And you may end up walking out on the job and just quitting. And that doesn't work.
And does that need to happen?
No.
Most of the time, honestly, I think that some managers and some leaders are just not aware of that. And they haven't had people have those, crucial conversations with them about that. And so, I feel so strongly about that I'm not afraid to have those conversations. Yeah. But they're not easy.
No, they're absolutely not. Now, number 5, number 5.
Yeah. So number 5.
This is one that's near and dear to my heart.
Yeah.
Okay,
so it's the silo trap. This is where we operate as an independent on a team. And I think that a lot of
sometimes one team is operating independently of others and not understanding how to work as a cog.
That, and you can also have a functional team that doesn't operate as a team. You have individuals on that, that are working independently and they're not working interdependently. I like to think of it like a jigsaw puzzle. A jigsaw puzzle is the vision of what you're trying to create. Okay. And everybody has to know that this is the Taj Mahal. Okay. If that's the jigsaw puzzle you're working
right.
on. And what happens though, is that a lot of people, because they don't talk about the mutual vision and they don't, discuss it enough, some people think that they're working on the Eiffel Tower. and so you got to have this mutual vision that you get that you're around and what you're building. And that's what helped bring collaboration. The reason why there's not a collaboration is that there's not this mutual vision of where we're headed. And there's been a lot of studies that have shown that a lot of people don't understand the strategy of the company. And even worse, they don't understand what they do every day, how that connects to the strategy.
Right.
So our job as leaders is to be able to create this mutual vision of where we're headed, show them, hey, we're going to do we're doing the Taj Mahal puzzle and we need everybody behind it. And here's your role. Here's what you're going to do. You're going to do this end of the puzzle, in building this. And that helps us avoid doing this work. But look, we're naturally inclined to, work independently, even think independently. We even hold the independence up as this highest virtue. This is where my father's work in 7 Habits said, look, there's dependency, there's independence, and there's interdependence. So he was holding up interdependence as the highest value, right. We, and it is. Mm-hmm. But yet, we talk about being financially independent, there's so much, especially in our American culture, about, the pinnacle of success is this being at this independent level.
Yeah.
And it's not.
No, there's not. And we've got to learn to work together, because John Kennedy's great quote, a rising tide raises all ships.
That's right.
When we start thinking that direction, the founder, Cavett Robert of the National Speakers Association, said for years, don't worry about getting a bigger piece of the pie, just make the pie bigger. When we do that and we work that way, it's much, much stronger.
Absolutely. So the answer to the silo trap is collaboration and seeing the value of the team. And you gave the perfect example, John F. Kennedy. Think about, what he said, we're going to put a man on the moon before the end of the century and bring him home safely. Well,
they didn't have a clue how they were going to do it.
Exactly. But he created the vision.
Yes.
And then what happened is that you had the collaboration. Before that, you had Eisenhower and say, we're going to be the world's leader in space exploration. What does that mean?
Yeah.
Okay. There was no compelling vision, but putting a man on the moon and bringing him back to the earth before the end of the century, that was not only a vision, but it was a vision with a deadline.
Yes.
And that's what brought about the collaboration.
And he also built in there the why, which is what Simon Sinek goes into with it starts with why.
That's right.
And the power behind that.
And as human beings, the why is critical, because if I don't understand why I'm doing something, my heart's not in it.
And if your heart's not in it,
then you're going to get the compliant me who is operating on 3 of 6 cylinders. I'm only giving you half of my effort.
Yeah. And your level of commitment's not going to be nearly as strong.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep.
All right. So collaboration comes in.
Yep.
Number 6.
So number 6 is the settling trap. And this is where we lose our passion and inspiration in our professional work. And when you think about the work that we do, it's important that 4 areas are met, 4 needs are met. Mm-hmm. First of all, we need to be paid well. Okay, that's need number 1. Need number 2 is our mind needs to be engaged and utilized. Number 3 is our heart. We need to have passion around what we do. And number 4 is that our spirit, we need to feel like we're contributing, that we're making a difference. Steve Jobs used to say that we're putting a dent in the universe, right? That we matter, that if we got hit by the bus tomorrow, it would matter that we weren't there. And so those are the 4 needs, our stomach, you could say, we need to be fed. Our mind needs to be engaged. Our heart needs to be engaged, and our spirit, and we need to feel like we're contributing and making a difference. And the reason why we have disengagement is because one of those 4 needs are not met. And when people leave companies, they don't leave because of pay, like a lot of people think. They leave because they're firing their immediate supervisor. And the reason why they're firing their immediate supervisor is they don't feel like their immediate supervisor cares about them. Maybe they don't listen enough to them. Yep. Maybe they don't give them enough projects that they're passionate about. And they don't explain the why, about why we're doing this and what contribution this is going to make. So it's the idea that the antidote to this it's the settling trap, the settling trap. And the antidote to it is this wholeness, looking at this whole person perspective, that we're more than just.
And I see that when it's the leader can do that, what can I do as the employee so that I'm not settling?
Well, I have a brother-in-law that went to school and got an engineering degree, but along the way, he had a friend that had a tuxedo business, and he decided that he was going to go into the tuxedo business for a year, just for a little while. Well, 25 years later, he was still at the tuxedo business. Why? Because he got married, he started having kids, he started becoming dependent upon that check, and he lost his vision. He lost his passion and inspiration in his professional work. He's since discovered that. He's left the tuxedo business, or the tuxedo business left him. It's not
really
it's not like what it was, back in the 80s.
Yep.
And he's now building airplanes. He loves what he's doing. Okay. But we often fall into this career comfort zone. So what we can do as individuals, you're asking, don't settle. There's jobs out there that will pay you fairly, that will utilize your mind and engage your heart, and will give you a purpose for why we're doing it, a vision and the why. And if you're in a job that's not like that, and you have a boss that doesn't seem to care about helping you fulfill your potential and having these 4 needs met, then you have options. You have tons of options. Mm-hmm. I'm just looking and reading about how a lot of people are not going back to work. They're trying some different things. And I think maybe a big part of that is that maybe they weren't fully engaged. Each of these areas weren't fully being met.
Yeah.
And the disengagement is not just in the US, it's globally. There is active or somewhat disengagement all over the world. And it's because one of these 4 needs not being met. So my answer to what your question is, don't settle. Don't settle as a leader and having people that are not fully engaged, and don't settle as an individual in a job that's the job that's not going to take you where you want to be.
And in the meantime, you've got to make sure you're still giving your best to the job that you've got.
Of course.
That's key. There's a song that Jimmy Buffett made very popular, written by Mac McAnally, called "It's My Job."
Yep.
And he talks about a street sweeper and the power of the street sweeper. There's also a great quote by the great Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. talking about the street sweeper and doing his job the best way possible. We've got to recognize that we've got to do our jobs the best that we possibly can. And as I saw Mac McAnally recently, he said, if you do the best job you can today at a job that sucks, it's just a path to a job that sucks less till you get to the job that you love.
Yeah, I like that. And again, I'm not advocating everybody leave their job.
No.
And sometimes people think, well, what do you want me to do? Well, no, I want you to influence it and say, look, I acknowledge that these are these 4 areas and look where you're deficient and then try to make an impact in your current environment to try to impact those changes. And a lot of times
Ziglar did that very well with people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. You can do that with people. I think that when leaders hear that, hey, I need to be more involved, or I need to be more engaged, or hey, can you give me a project I'm more passionate about? Can I take on that project? Most of the time they'll say yes. They'll say, okay, yeah, of course. But we have to give that feedback.
Isn't that also kind of lending us now to the 7th trap?
Yeah.
It's a great setup there. Thank you very much.
So it's the myopia trap where we fail to see the big picture. And it's not only us as individuals, but it's the myopia trap, the companies that don't provide the line of sight into their employees. So if we are just focused on our job and we don't connect it back to the strategy of the company and the results of the company, then we're operating in the myopia trap. We're operating in this too small of a focus where we're just looking through this lens of glasses, that is just too narrow. We need to open up our minds and we need to see the big picture. So as individuals at the company, we need to make sure that we understand what we do and how it connects to the strategy and how it connects to the results. And when we do that, we have the why. We understand the why now. Okay, that's very important. For a company, the company's job is to make sure that they communicate the strategy over and over and over again so that their people know what the strategy is and they know how they contribute, how each of the team members contribute to the strategy. So the company can do a better job in communicating the strategy and communicating the why and the vision of where we're headed. And a lot of times leaders think, oh, I've done that. Well, no, you don't do that at the first of the year and you're done. No. This is something that you do all the time.
Right. Right. And that ties back into the core values. If you communicate your strategy, you focus on your core values, then you're going to start to drive it all.
Right.
Yeah,
exactly. And the other thing too, is this whole idea is that we can actually we can do our job, but we can actually, if asked, we can even go above and beyond. I think of Jim Delegati, the guy that created the Big Mac, right? He was in Pennsylvania and he had this idea for the Big Mac. He went to his boss and his boss said, I'm not sure. And eventually he kept persisting, but eventually they tried his idea, the 2 layers, 2-layer bun,
patty, special sauce, lettuce, cheese,
yeah, exactly,
on a sesame seed bun.
You got it. And that was Jim Delegati. That wasn't his job to do it. I think of Post-it notes. Okay. We all have Post-it notes.
Yep.
Arthur Fry, you know what the story is there?
Oh yeah.
Arthur Fry was going to church and he had a hymnal and he put pieces of paper in the hymnal during the week. And then when he went to church on Sunday, those papers fell out. So he went to his friend at 3M and said, hey, can you help make my paper sticky? Now, it wasn't Arthur Fry's job to do that, but he had a problem in his life and he wanted to solve it. And eventually 3M created this product called Post-it notes, which we all use.
Yep.
But the point is that not only, so I call it elevate. This is where we elevate above and beyond what our role is. And as human beings, we have that creativity. We mentioned the example with Google, when people are given 20% of their time, how they can come up with new creations and new ideas.
That's just fascinating. I just looked at the clock and we have been going for almost 50 minutes here. And it's like, wow.
You got to quit talking, Greg. You just keep going on and on.
Oh my gosh. We could definitely go on for more and more on this one without a doubt. It's been a privilege to have you here on our podcast. The podcast is the Teamwork Advantage, and our whole goal is to help people understand how to increase teamwork, leadership, and culture. And every week when you listen to our show, guess what? You get ideas that you can implement immediately. Please be sure to hit the subscribe, the like button down below. Tell your friends about it. Tell your friends about David's, his book, The Trap Tales, Outsmarting the 7 Hidden Obstacles to Success. And you can pick that book up, I'm assuming, just anywhere you get books. Am I right?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yep.
And so, David, again, thanks very much for joining us here on the podcast. Until next week, folks, remember, having a good day is just being average. When you listen to the Teamwork Advantage, you're not average. So go make today an excellent and exceptional day. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks.
You've been listening to the Teamwork Advantage with Greg Gregory. Be sure to like, subscribe, and activate the bell icon to be notified of future episodes. To learn more about how Greg can help your organization develop a powerful winning culture, visit TeamsRock.com. That's TeamsRock.com.